Hello and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzy Ostwalt. Religion functions in life in many ways. It provides a worldview, a system of beliefs and behaviors, and rituals that help us order our lives. Religion might also help adherents forge a path to health and happiness. My guest today is an expert in Chinese philosophical traditions that some would say constitute religious systems. Dr. Matt Faust will introduce us to an ancient Chinese tradition, Taoism, and to some of the teachings the Tao might hold for contemporary Americans. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks very much, Ozzy.
Thanks for coming on. You're a repeat guest, and today's topic is quite different from the first time around.
That's true.
Which tells us a little bit about your varied interests and academic specialties. And one of your specialties that you list is ancient Chinese philosophy and classical American philosophy and the way they interact, or the intersection between the two. And I find that fascinating. I would never have put those two together.
Oh, yeah. The classical American thinkers, particularly the earlier ones, such as Emerson and Thoreau, got their hands on early available translations of ancient Chinese texts and found a lot of interest in them. And, Thoreau in particular I find fascinating. In so many of his texts, he would drop quotes of these Chinese texts, but not give any attribution to them. And further, he was reading French translations of the Chinese text. So for a long time, people didn't know what the heck it was that he was quoting.
Right.
And we have to rely on scraps of paper and notebooks that got stashed away and came up to the surface, decades ago.
That's really fascinating. I mean, I've long time recognized that Thoreau was influenced by Asian thought, and I think he was reading the Bhagavad Gita from Hinduism, but I didn't know he was reading Taoist texts and other Chinese texts, but in a French translation. That's really interesting.
Yeah, well, actually, it's not been fully established that he was reading Taoist texts, though Confucian, yes. And I have been one of the people who have brought that to the attention of contemporary scholars. There wasn't a French translation of Taoist text in full available to Thoreau. However, there were some translations of bits and pieces of various historical Chinese documents in which perhaps some pieces of the Tao Te Ching were placed.
Well, I want to come back to that and talk about some of these interrelations. Maybe we can do a little basic work first. But I want to say a little more about you. You're chair of the Philosophy and Religion Department here, and you're also president of the Josiah Royce Society and secretary of the International Society for Chinese Philosophy, and the father of a 2-year-old. So
yes.
You're quite...
That's the most important.
That's the most important.
Yes.
You're quite the busy person.
Yeah.
And a little bit of an underachiever here. Can you be president of the International Society for Chinese Philosophy? So in terms of Taoism, that might be a term and a phrase that many people are unfamiliar with. And if we can get this first image up on the screen, I wanted to ask you first things first. Is it Taoism with a T or Taoism with a D? And either way, it's pronounced the same. Is that correct?
It should be pronounced Taoism, and that's a great image because I think the most long-standing way of rendering the term is the first one with a T, and that dates back to the Wade-Giles system of Romanizing, Latinizing, the Chinese terms, and that's just two scholars, Wade and Giles, and more recently in the 1950s, China instituted what's called the Hanyu Pinyin system, which is literally Chinese language phonetic system of spelling, which more closely approximates the pronunciation. So. True enough, when we were spelling it with a T, it was still being pronounced Taoism in China.
Right.
And so spelling it with a D is more accurate capture of the pronunciation. And so the more recent publications on Taoism generally opt for the D.
Yeah, way back when I was in school, I learned it with a T, so it's good to know now that I've been doing it wrong all these years. But now I can spell it and pronounce it the same way.
That's right. And, you know, the word Tao with a T pronunciation translates to escape. And so there is a kind of rendering which is really unfortunate. If we say Taoism, we could be understood as referring to escapism. And Taoist philosophy isn't that. Taoist philosophy definitely wants us to face reality. But it does recommend facing reality in a way that's quite different than that which is recommended by its competitors, and which is a more simple and fluid way of facing reality. It's not escapism, but is a more simplified way of allowing one's life to flow.
Okay. So I'm glad you did the definition of Tao, because Tao has a translation as well. What does Tao mean?
Tao means way or path. And, you know, if we were giving directions from one place to another in China, we might use the word Tao quite a bit as we're doing that. So just as we would ordinarily use the word way, they would ordinarily use the word Tao. But in this sense, Taoism, Taoist philosophy, or even Taoist religion as a tradition, there is a focus here on path making and path taking. And you know, there's a recognition that there are many Tao. There are many paths we can take. We may be talking about our personal spiritual paths. We may be talking about political paths. We could be talking about paths in nature. There are many paths that we take in life, and Taoist philosophy, again, emphasizes paths which are more conducive to our flourishing than others, and thinks generally those are ones that we should be naturally in sync with, and warns against various forces that seem to conspire to push us in a direction of artificiality and move us away from our nature.
So this really is a different way of viewing reality. If I think of we'll say the Abrahamic religions, which I'm more familiar with, the idea that there could be multiple ways is anathema to that system of thinking. So in Taoism, you could not only have different paths in life, but you could have different spiritual paths, different ways to go along the spirit way.
Sure.
Is that accurate? Yeah.
I think that's accurate. Yes. You know, there is a recognition of various types of crafts that or vocations that suit various individuals well. In you know, Taoist philosophy very much calls for us to be attuned to what our natural proclivities and talents are, and to follow those through, and to develop them. And there is a recognition that for some it won't take long to figure that out. For others, it may take quite a long while. And there's an embrace of that, right? So there's an aversion toward thinking like you've got to have that figured out by the time you're, and fill in the blank with whatever the age would be.
Right.
Right.
Which is, we put a lot of pressure on our kids to think that way, or on ourselves to think that way.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out, so I shouldn't be worried at this point, right? I mean, I'm still on the path and trying to find my way.
That's absolutely. You shouldn't be worried. To worry too much is to veer away from the path, because naturally you weren't too worried about those things. As a child, as a young child, you didn't worry too much. You weren't pressing too much about what your future was going to look like. You were more interested in play and having your basic needs fulfilled. Right. And you know, paying attention to the wisdom of the child is really important here too.
So is it accurate to say that the way is a more intuitive process of walking through life than perhaps what we're used to?
Yes, I think that's totally accurate.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, here we're on a university campus, and we do have a kind of structure to things, we presume. For the most part, students will be ages 18 to 22. If we have students who are coming in older, we might call them adult learners or non-traditional students. And to use those labels is already to kind of cast a certain classification on them. right? They're unconventional, and so call for perhaps a different model of doing the thing we're doing here. But there's no particular timetable from the perspective of Taoism. One finds one's way, and one finds this way no longer leads me to fulfillment, and so it's time to turn and take another fork in the road.
It's quite freeing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. The Taoist philosophers put forward a philosophy that they think is more liberating, more conducive to freedom than others that are around competing for attention.
Okay. So you use the word Taoist philosophers, and I know there's a debate about whether Taoism constitutes a philosophical system or a religious system. Is that even the right question, or do you have any thoughts about whether Taoism is a religion in the way that we think about religion?
In China, there's a term called San Jiao. It means three teachings, and it refers to the three teachings that have been most formative to Chinese civilization. And these are Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. The breaking of San Jiao into other things, in particular Dao Jiao and Dao Jia, is a relic of 20th century academic scholarship. Okay. Dao Jia refers to the school of Tao. So Dao Jiao is teachings of Tao. Dao Jia, school of Tao, gets used to refer to people we call Taoist philosophers, like Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi. That's a handy classification if you want to classify individuals and texts into disciplines such as philosophy, and present that body of work as in some way distinct from religious Taoism. I'm not too concerned about those lines. I'm really happy to have them be blurry. I like to think of all of the traditions as traditions and teachings, right? I'd be comfortable with thinking of Platonic philosophy as ancient Greek teaching. I don't need to call it philosophy, right. And yet I'm also happy to call these Chinese teachings philosophies because I am in that discipline, right? And I want my students, who are largely enculturated in traditions of the West, to take seriously these traditions from the East.
All right. And do they? Are they mostly open?
Mostly, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. I think because they come around to them later than they come around to other traditions from the West, they're more curious. And they may be burned out on some of the ideas from Western thought and find something potentially freeing and novel about Taoist philosophy in particular.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the second image I have here, if we can get that up on the screen, is probably the most recognizable image associated with Taoism, and has made inroads also into other religions. You want to say a word about the
Yeah, this is the logo that's on the Chinese national Taoist football team's helmet. Not really. This is the yin yang, and the yin yang is it's really philosophically significant. If we take a look, the yin refers to the black side, and the yang refers to the white side. But we notice that the circle is not a bisected circle, one half of which is white and one half of which is black. Rather, the two sides seem to be swirling into one another, and each side has contained in it a dot with the other color. So the yin refers to the shady or cloudy side of a mountain, literally, and refers to the more passive or dark aspects of all natural things. And yang refers to the sunny side of a mountain, literally, and refers to the more active or energetic side of things. And the idea is that there's no thing which is fully yang and no thing which is fully yin. And the way nature goes, it's always dynamic, always in a process of flux. Sometimes one force is more dominant than the other, but at all times it's pregnant with the possibility of the other force evening it out. So balance is really key here and being expressed in that emblem.
Balance and harmony, and you get this idea of fluidity, which you mentioned earlier about reality. So, yeah, this is I remember being introduced to this symbol in middle school, actually, and it's just a really kind of universal symbol now. And I think Westerners sometimes look at this and interpret it as a dualism, and that's a mistake, right?
It's just not the full picture.
Okay.
Yeah, yin and yang are opposites, but they're complementary opposites.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are two things there. So it's okay if all we mean by dualism is there are two forces rather than three or four, but they're not in opposition to one another. Definitely, they go hand in hand, and we even see it now in our conversation. You speak, you pose a question to me. I listen, I consider your question, and I'm not fully passive because I'm also starting to formulate the response, and I issue the response, and you're listening, and you're not totally passive because you're thinking about how my response connects with the previous response or something else you had in your mind. So this is ordinary, and our conversation goes well, I think, to the extent that we maintain this balance. Neither one of us is drowning out the other.
Yeah, that's a nice analogy, yeah. So, when we talk about religion, oftentimes we talk about rituals and practices. Are there rituals and practices that you would associate with Taoism that stand out? It's kind of uniquely Taoist?
Uniquely Taoist. Well, there is a kind of concern for the cultivation of qi and aspiring to longevity. Not more longevity than which is natural, but getting the utmost out of what one has naturally been imbued with.
And qi is life force.
Oh, yes.
Life energy. Is that? Yeah.
That's a good. Yes,
Okay,
a good
all right.
translation would be life force or energy, and we see, qi being moved in exercises like Tai Chi, and which are very popular culturally in China. We'll often see, actually, especially elders outside early in the morning doing their Tai Chi. And actually, that's an important detail, too, that the activity is happening outside. I think Taoist philosophy pays special attention to this, that which is natural and simple and fluid is attached to or related to the outdoors rather than the indoors. Of course, not at the exclusion of being indoors. That would be to take out the balance between yin and yang. But we often exclude the outdoors, don't we? We go to gyms that are indoors or exercise classes that are indoors. We hold our classes usually indoors. And sometimes a student will ask, hey, can we meet outside? And our initial reaction to that, if you're anything like me, is to kind of bristle. I think, hey, we've got some serious work to do here.
Right.
Yeah, we can't be going outside. But actually, there's something that Taoists would value about a student desiring for the learning and teaching activity to be happening in a more natural setting.
Yeah.
Right.
When I was in China a few years ago, exactly what you said about people performing Tai Chi in outdoor spaces in groups. Elders in the morning, workers on their lunch break, even in a midnight mall, all the time.
That's right.
Yeah. So, are we at our best when we are in nature and outside and being cognizant of our surroundings, not just outside, getting from one place to another?
I think Taoist philosophy would suggest so, yes.
Okay.
That's right. And, we find in our artistic depictions of our Taoist philosophers, they're outside. And they're outside often with animals, in a sort of unperturbed communion with animals like frogs who are quite typically jumpy and wouldn't have anything to do with a philosophical meditation.
Right. You mentioned a couple of thinkers that are associated with Taoism, and please forgive my pronunciation, but Lao Tzu and Zhongzi. Close.
Let me help you with the second one.
Okay.
But you did well with the first one.
Okay.
And that is important because just as oftentimes Taoism gets mispronounced because of that T spelling, as Taoism, oftentimes I hear Lao Tzu. And that, again, comes from that Wade-Giles system. And so you'll see it spelled with a TZU at the end. But actually the term at the end there is Zi, which means master. It's an honorific title.
So it's really important to get that right.
It's important to get it right. And Lao actually means old. So Lao Tzu it actually means master old dude. Oftentimes these names are master and the surname of the person. But in this case, Lao is not a surname. Lao actually means old. And it's not totally clear that there actually was a Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu might be a composite figure.
Well, I've got a picture of him here if we get it up here, so we know.
Well, if you have photographic evidence.
No, well, we do have we have an image of Lao Tzu. If we can get him up there. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's not proof, right?
But
he is an old dude, and
that's right.
He looks like a master.
He looks like a master, looks very wise. That's right. But the other one is Zhuangzi.
And I also have an image of and help me again.
Okay,
Zhuangzi.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And so his surname is Zhuang, and it's the way it goes with a lot of these classical Chinese thinkers, right? Another one that will be familiar to people, not a Taoist, is Confucius.
Yes.
And his name is really Kongzi, it's Master Kong, and then in the middle there you have Fu, which is another honorific title. Kong Fu Zi really is like really Master Kong.
Right.
Yeah, and then again it's just a stroke of translation. We wind up referring to him as Confucius, but in his time he wouldn't have been called Confucius. Right.
So the Tao Te Ching, which is one of the most recognizable text associated with Taoism, is attributed to Lao Tzu if in fact he was a real person.
Right.
And then Zhongzi also has a text attributed to him, which is Zhongzi, right? Or something close to that.
Close to that.
Okay. So what for people who are familiar with sacred text and other traditions, what are these texts like?
Okay. So the Tao Te Ching, that title, Jing means classic text. And it's the classic text that's about the subjects of Tao and De. We've talked about Tao. De is a term we might translate as potency or potential. And I guess it relates a bit to how I just described Qi. Okay, so it's a classic book about Tao and De. And it reads, actually, there are several vignettes that are quite poetic. And it reads in a way which I think a lot of people find lovely, and because of its poetic style, and maybe mysterious because of that style, and maybe some others might be frustrated. They may feel it's rather abstract. But there are, I think, with patience, a lot of good nuggets there. And I referred to earlier to the wisdom of the child, and there are a number of passages in this text that ask questions like, with your qi, can you be as pliant as a newborn baby? And again, thinking about how our bodies work and how free and fast and loose a young child is. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, our bodies are more composed of water at childbirth than they are later in our life.
I learned something.
Yes, so we are actually, we're literally more fluid at our earliest time in life than we are as we gain our years. Yeah, so that text, I think it is the most well-known, most often translated text in the Taoist tradition. And you'll find dozens of passages there on various topics. Some of them even have to do with things like governing. I think some popular misperception is that Taoist philosophy is anarchist, and it's not quite right. There's a famous passage in the Tao Te Ching which says, ruling a large state is like frying a small fish. And so it's not saying ruling a large state ought not to be done, but it is suggesting that it needs to be done with quite a lot of care, right? You don't want to overdo it, and it's easy to overdo it.
That saying seems to suggest there's a lot of paradox in some of these writings and some of the teachings of Taoism.
Yes, paradox or apparent paradox.
Okay.
I think if you allow yourself to dwell in the paradox, you'll find you can make some sense of it.
Right.
Yeah. The Zhuangzi is a different style of text. A number of tales about Zhuangzi interacting with various people, some people who are clearly wildly fictional, and some others who appear to be people who he knew, including a number with his best friend Huiza. And those passages, some of them called the inner chapters, are thought to be written by him. But there are other strata of the text that appear to be written by followers of Zhuangzi or even followers of followers. And they're reporting on things that Zhuangzi said or did that may or may not be things that he said or did, but would perhaps answer to philosophical preoccupations at the time those passages are being written.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about a story that I've heard you tell about Zhuangzi and Huiza.
Yes.
And we don't have time, so we have to come back. But it is a fun little story about happiness and about the way we perceive the world and think about the world. Those texts are really different. So, and I'm not familiar, unfortunately, with Zhuangzi, but I am with the Tao Te Ching some. In just a minute, let me ask you this, and you mentioned earlier that Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism.
Yes.
Buddhism.
Yes.
Three religions in China. They kind of operate together in a way to create an Asian worldview, which seems a little different from the way we think about religions in the West.
That's right. Yeah, and sometimes in China, people remark something like, you can be a Taoist in the morning, a Confucian in the afternoon, a Buddhist at night, and the order of these is arbitrary. You can say them in any order you wish, right? So the idea that you choose one exclusive from the others is not so strictly adhered to there at all.
Right, back to the fluidity of things.
That's correct.
That's great.
That's correct.
Well, this has been very interesting. Really filled in a lot of gaps in my knowledge, and hopefully it's a good introduction for people who are interested in religion but maybe have never encountered Taoism before. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And next time we'll talk about the happiness of fish.
I want to talk about the happiness of fish. Absolutely. That'd be a great topic for the next one. Well, that's it for Religion and Life this week. I hope you'll join us here on App TV again next time as we continue to explore the relationship between religion, culture, and society. Until then, this is Ozzy Ostwald.